Hey there, and welcome back to the IT Guy Show. I'm your host, Eric the IT Guy Hendricks. This is episode number 18. Today, we're going to be talking about an age old topic, X11. If you're unfamiliar, X11 is a window management system for Linux that has been around since before I was born. So, there's been a lot of news around X11. Some projects are retiring it completely. Other projects are working to extend X11. So I wanted to dive into this topic a little bit. What are the pros, what are the cons? But of course, like we like to do on the show, I wanted to start out with a little bit of a conversation of what is X11, what was it built to do, talk a little bit about the history, um, and then we'll talk about the future of X11, such as it was. So I reached out onto the Fediverse. Loving Mastodon lately. It's been a great place to have conversations. Reached out and just said, "Hey, this isn't an area where I shine. Is there somebody that could come on the show and talk about this?" So I was really excited that my guest today, Brodie Robertson, volunteered to come on the show and have a talk about X11. So Brodie, welcome to the IT Guy Show.
Hey, how's it going? You have a lot more production quality than I have for my stuff. I appreciate it. You have like a whole intro and everything. That's awesome. 300 episodes in for me, and I don't have anything like that. I guess I do Linux videos on my channel. I talk Wayland. I That's my main thing right now. I talk various other Linux related things. Just a whole manner of Linux. And right now, Wayland is kind of like a big talking point. And because I talk Wayland, obviously you have to talk X11 as well. They're kind of inherently related in that way.
For sure. So what do you do for your day job?
Uh, so right now it's like a kind of mix. Like YouTube does most of what I do. My other stuff, it's literally just like when I decide to leave it, I'll leave it. I just have like a job in a supermarket packing shelves. I've done some dev work in the past, but like right now, the YouTube stuff is basically my main thing.
Awesome. Well, we will definitely put links to all of your content in the show notes. Uh, yeah, I would love to get to a place in my life where I could do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Fortunately, with young kids in the house, they like to eat, and they tend to eat a lot. So I gotta bring in a good source of income for that. But yeah, I envy you getting to create content, have conversations like this all day. Outside of YouTube and stocking shelves, is there anything you do for fun, or is this kind of everything?
I've been doing some Godot like game development recently. That's been kind of fun. But besides that, I like playing some games. Right now I'm playing through the original Final Fantasy VII.
Oh,
I
nice.
like watching anime and yeah, also just messing around with my Linux system. Right now I'm playing with the Neri compositor, and that's been a lot of fun.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's awesome, and glad to see another nerd in the in the show. It's funny. So many times we get talking to folks, and it's just like, well, what do you do for fun? This. Okay, so
Right,
what do you
right,
do when
right.
you're away from your computer? I think about this. Whether it's technology or using technology or gaming. Um,
Mhm.
of course, big D&D nerd myself, and I found
Yeah,
that
I
the
used to play
more
a
I
lot of
game.
3.5e myself.
Gotcha. Yeah, I came in around 5e, and I've enjoyed it. I dabbled in Savage Worlds a little bit. I like that system a little bit more, but you just can't beat the classic nature of D&D, and you just can't beat some of the stories and that kind of thing. Been taking a party through Tyranny of Dragons over the past year and a half or so. Um, so I haven't completely murdered my party yet, so I guess I got to try harder. So, as I kind of teased in the intro, wanted to talk a little bit about where the Linux desktop is and where it's going. But to do that, I feel like we need to talk about where it came from a little bit. Of course, for most of us, I was a Linux systems administrator for years, so didn't spend a lot of time on the GUI side until I realized that this actually works really really well as a desktop too, arguably better than a couple of the other alternatives out there. Um, Looking at a particular operating system, Microsoft. Anyway, um, so what is X11 and why is it such a big deal?
So this could be the entire conversation unto itself. Um, I
That's quite
think
nowhere else to be.
I would like to answer the other questions as well. So, if we go well back into the past, back into the 80s, the X Windows system is not the first of its kind. It is not a unique concept. Prior to Unix, there's a bunch of different approaches to doing windowing systems. On Unix, there are a bunch as well. But what X really did that sort of changed a lot of things is it was the sort of, I guess, unification. It came about during a time where there wasn't really a standard that existed. There were protocols developing, and the idea of a network display protocol, which is what X was, or it still is today, that came from a time where personal computers weren't really a thing. Where if you were using a computer, for the most part, it was going to be, yes, personal computers, before anyone gets me, yes, they technically did exist, but most people, especially in a university context, were working with some big mainframe and you would want to access those resources. So X sort of came about as a way, a platform independent way to allow students and researchers at MIT to access the resources on this system in a way that could be shared. And it was very heavily inspired by something known as V from the W operating system, or is that W from the V operating system? I always get the direction mixed up. It's named X because it's from something called V and W. That's why it's a continuation of the letters.
Yes,
Through
sir.
the X9, X10, and then into X11, it sort of became a windowing system that other places were adopting because the solutions that already existed weren't really being licensed out. And if they were being licensed out, they were very expensive. So X sort of came along as this way that other universities were able to adopt and sort of took over from there. And to this day, it is basically still like a core standard across Linux, across the BSDs, across the traditional Unixes, which still exist on macOS, albeit it's not what macOS uses for its core windowing system, but it is supported across all of these different platforms. And it's that like base standard that you know is going to be there
Mm.
for the most part until now.
So to kind of sum up what I heard, it was a collection of protocols and design principles that sort of unified what was otherwise kind of a hodgepodge of different display mechanisms.
Well, it was a different approach to doing a display mechanism. It was a whole unique approach that sort of became a standard itself. A lot of people confuse the idea of the X windowing system with, so there's both the protocols which we refer to as X11, and then the implementation we primarily make use of today is Xorg. Um, there was others in the past. Others still exist in some form, like over in the BSD world, as FreeBSD, FreeBSD, I believe. You have things like Xenakara on macOS. You have Xquart, unless it was renamed. I'm pretty sure the Unixes still use Xorg as well. But there have been others in the past, like Xorg spawned off of the X3D6 project. Yeah, I'm kind of just rambling, but
No,
feel free to
this is
cut me off
good.
at any point.
No, this is helpful. And I've been around Xorg. I've been around X11. I've been I remember the days as a Linux sysadmin where you had to port where you had to open up ports on your Linux server in order to get to a graphical installer for a database. Uh,
Mhm, mhm,
and I remember trying to export those variables to your local system. It just a mess. So it's very interesting to see this laid out more linearly, if I can use words.
mhm, mhm.
So when did you first encounter X11? What was your what was your first experience and what did you think about this?
Well, for me, it was when I first switched to Linux, which would have been probably, I guess technically I'd used even earlier now that I think about it, because I had used things like CentOS and a virtual machine before and other things like that. Like my switch to Linux happened during university when I was going through a software engineering degree. Yes, I have a software engineering degree to make YouTube videos. I know it's a great use of the degree. I'm certainly not the only one who's done this, but yeah, I guess it probably would have been like X11 GNOME on CentOS or something at the time.
Mm.
But the first time I knew it was X11 is when I swapped over to Linux full time, when I swapped to Arch and I was using i3WM. And frankly, I didn't really have any opinions on it, right? Because it at that point, so that would have been what, 2019-ish? Yeah, that sounds about right. By that point, like X11 development, Xorg development had basically been frozen for a very long time with very minor patches being made along the way. So it had already had, 30 plus years of development and got to a point where things were just rock solid. There's nothing that was offensive about it. There was nothing that suddenly broke. It's not like the early days where, if you wanted to configure your monitors, you'd have to reboot the entire system. It was kind of just there.
Gotcha. Yeah, is one of those key foundational aspects of any Linux distribution. Is one of those things that you can't really take a lot of risks. You've got to be able to display your information. Like the only thing I could think of that's more critical is like your file system. You can't have your file system just go out and just suddenly decide to forget an entire batch of files, much like your display server.
Corruption issue a couple of days ago, actually.
Oh no. So looking at this progression, what were some things that X11 solved well?
Okay, so there's lots of different ways you can approach that question. Because we can talk about some of the functionality that's still not present within Wayland. One example, which most people don't really use, but it's still really neat that you can do, is because it's this whole idea of you can connect into you can like network into another machine. You can do all of this stuff over the network. You're not necessarily dealing with real computers, right? Like it's not like you have to run it on this one machine where there's like a real output. And the real output's very important there, because one thing you can do is you can create a fake graphical output that to the applications they think is real and they will render correctly. And this allows you to run a headless system and have the applications actually still function. And most people aren't going to use this, but I know there are people who are blind who weren't going to use the monitor anyway and don't plug in a display and actually just use this as a way to just have the output functioning. It's not you don't have to do this, right? You could plug in a monitor, you could have it all be a thing that works like you might expect it to. But the fact that this is something you actually can do, I think is just kind of neat. Also, the fact that X11 was designed from the very start to be platform independent. Wayland was designed at a time where Linux had already become the main Unix, besides obviously macOS, which is doing their own thing, but the main Unix, which was going to be messing with Wayland anyway. And because of that, there is some design considerations made, which have made it difficult for the BSDs to adopt Wayland. They're working on it, but they need to do things in a more Linuxy way. But it was designed with the intention from the start for any sort of Unix to adopt it. Also, it can run on ancient hardware. It's from a time where, it was from the 80s originally. So everything from then to now, you're kind of good with. Then you also have nice things like this is something which is slowly being worked on Wayland. There's technically a protocol that's solving it, but it's not adopted on everything. That is, you don't have this forced compositing that Wayland has, which does improve things visually and feel wise for the user, but at the same time does implement a bit of an input delay, which for people who are doing, high-end gaming can be a bit of a deal. When I say a bit of an input delay, it's like 5 or 6 milliseconds. But for some people, that can be a big deal. And then also the fact that it is a really old solution. It is a very mature solution. And it's a solution that isn't going to change because most of the work's already been done, right? Like X11 is the way X11 is going to be. And if you come back in 10 years, you know exactly what you're going to get. And there's definitely value in having a very mature solution like that.
But like you pointed out, it's over 30 years old now, probably closer to 40, and
Yeah, 40. Yeah.
and so you carry forward a lot of legacy. Um, so one of the things that you hear about online is a lot of security vulnerabilities. Because something's so old, because so much has just been carried forward, kicked down the road, as it were. Uh, we see a lot of issues with X11 being vulnerable to different types of attacks. What
Mhm.
sorts of vulnerabilities are we talking about?
So I've not been paying super close attention to the recent ones, but even just at its very core, like when most people are running X11, there are no controls for stopping an application drawing over another window. Now, this allows you to do some funny things, some fancy graphical effects. But at the same time, if you were to download something malicious and it knew you had something like a Bitwarden installed, there is nothing stopping it from drawing over that Bitwarden window and, just taking whatever password you enter into it, or the fact that there is no access controls on your keyboard. So writing a keylogger for Xorg is a matter of 2 lines of Python, importing the keyboard library and then listening to the keyboard basically. And that does allow you to do a lot of really cool things. And that's really convenient to work with. But like a lot of early web protocols where great example, Telnet is sorry, I'm blank. Is Telnet's the one that has no like encryption, yes? It's
Mhm.
just like yeah, okay, sorry. I was just blanking for a second.
No, you're fine.
1:50 in the morning. Telnet was designed at a time where if you were using it on a local university network, that's not that big of a deal, and nobody was trying to listen in on that traffic. But if you were telnetting a server today, like obviously that's going to go badly for you. And in the same way, a lot of the design for X11 was designed at the time where there weren't malware wasn't a thing yet, right? Like malware was not a thing that was distributed. You didn't have wide internet usage, wide open internet usage where you're going to have developers trying to maliciously target you.
No, sir. So how about you personally? Have you had any X11 horror stories, any horrific crashes or anything that you'd want to share with the audience?
So when I was first using DistroBox, on other distros like Fedora, it actually goes and deals with this problem for me. On Arch, though, when I tried to open a GUI application, it had this issue where every time I tried to do it, it would say error cannot open display 0. I had to go in reasonably, it was not letting me do this, but I had to go and run xhost and just completely open up the access controls for the X11 display because otherwise it wasn't able to connect to it. This was a good thing, by the way. It shouldn't have been able to connect to it. I just had no idea this was a problem. The other issue I had was dealing with screen tearing. There is technically a way to deal with screen sharing on X11, and technically it works sometimes. There's like an option you can add into your config for AMD GPUs and Intel GPUs. It's a completely different option. I added it to the config and it worked until it didn't work, and then it started working again, and I still have no idea why. I don't know if it was the refresh rate in my display. I don't know what it could have been. All I know is, if you want to deal with screen tearing, good luck. Try compositing. Maybe it'll go better for you. Maybe.
So we've kind of hinted at this a little bit.
Mhm,
X11 is on its way out
mhm,
and is being replaced by a project called Wayland, which I'm
mhm,
sure any of our listeners will have plenty of opinions on it. But I like to start from kind of ground zero with
mhm,
Wayland with any topic. So
mhm.
let's start with this. What is Wayland?
So Wayland is firstly Wayland is a protocol set. This is a confusion people make. Wayland isn't the implementation. It is a set of protocols like eX-11 is a set of protocols. It is a set of protocols being designed from the ground up with modern application or modern desktop requirements in mind. So eX-11, as we stated, was designed back in the 80s. And when you design something back that long ago, you're going to make some correct choices, yes. But there's going to be some things you cannot anticipate simply because of the fact that they didn't exist yet. And there's the issues with all of the security issues as well, which a whole big topic. So Wayland is basically what were eX-11 desktops coming together and trying to design something better. Now, that doesn't always go super well, as I've covered in many of my videos, but that is the goal, basically. Now, with that, we also, because we're designing something from the ground up, we also have the ability to address this newer hardware, like the fact that recently, maybe like 2 or so years ago now, HDR displays are a thing that actually work. You can do things like have mixed refresh rate and that actually function correctly. You can have FreeSync, on one display and not on another display, and it actually works. There is a thing called displays that exist. That's a fun thing with our eX-11. Displays aren't real. It is a fabrication through software magic to make it seem like displays are real and multi-displays function, but they don't exist.
So how did Wayland kind of become the decision? How did we decide to forgo eX-11, move to Wayland? I'm sure there are other options at the time when this all went down.
So I guess the simplest answer to that is the fact that the desktops are moving to Wayland. Now, why are the desktops moving to Wayland? Well, the desktops are moving to Wayland because I guess, honestly, like, it's because nobody wanted to go and unravel the mess that is eX-11 and Xorg. It's at the point where if you want to go and bring eX-11 into that modern era, address those modern problems, you would need to make so many breaking changes to it, so many improvements, so many just rewrites of existing attempts to do things that even if you were to continue down the eX-11 legacy and make, an X12 as some people have wanted there to be, it wouldn't be compatible with what eX-11 already is, in the same way that X10 was not compatible with what eX-11 became. It's basically something where you kind of had to do it if you wanted to do it right. You had to start from the ground up and try to work your way to a good solution.
So that begs the question: is the community excited about this move to Wayland?
So I've done polls on my audience, and obviously my audience is going to be people who are more interested in playing around with things. But other people have done similar polls, and it seems to be roughly the same sort of breakdown. Roughly somewhere in the range of 75 to 80% of people are on Wayland at this point. And I think for a lot of people, it's not a matter of it being exciting. They're kind of just using the thing they use. Like, whilst there are people like me who are actually interested in talking about this topic, I think it's really important to remember that most people don't actually care. Most people are just using the thing that is provided to them. And as long as it's not doing anything that is getting in their way, they're going to be happy. And we're at a point now where most of the low-hanging fruit has been addressed. Most of those core fundamental, we want the desktop to basically work, that's all dealt with. Now we're in the weeds. Now we're in the fun part of how far are we going to take it? This is where you start seeing a lot of the very interesting discussions about what is the limitations of the scope of Wayland? What should be a protocol? What should be a portal, which is a way that things like global shortcuts been handled, and what simply shouldn't be possible? What shouldn't be carried over from that old X11 legacy because it was a product of its time and not necessarily something which still has value today.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm definitely as technical as I've been in my career. I'm definitely in the camp, especially on the desktop, of I just want the thing to work.
I
And
get it. Yeah.
it seems like there's a couple of areas around. We'll talk about accessibility first, where
Mhm.
Wayland is still trying to catch up. Is that kind of your perspective as well?
Yes and no, because it kind of depends on accessibility is not like just one thing. It's a very
Hmm.
broad topic.
For sure.
And for certain areas, like screen readers, for example, if we are talking about GNOME and KDE, screen readers at this point basically work as good, if not better. There were a lot of issues with desktops announcing things in weird ways that just didn't really like it, and double announcing windows, just things that were really annoying to someone who relies on a screen reader to work consistently, which have been improving greatly under Wayland. Now, this is on GNOME and KDE. The problem that we have with Wayland, it's a problem and it's also a blessing, is we don't have an Xorg of Wayland. What we have is multiple different implementations that all mostly agree on a core set of protocols, but then there's a bunch of additional things here and there which they don't implement, which creates a big whole mess on some of the additional applications you might want to be using. But for the for a lot of the accessibility stuff, things are definitely good, and I think a lot of the I don't want to say it's perfect, right? Because someone who needs a screen reader for their system to function, one of the nice things about X11 is even though it is old and even though it is not perfect, it's gonna work the same way it's always worked. And you can rely on the fact that there's not going to be some regression that comes along. There's not going to be some update that adjusts how windows are labeled. The ways it's bad, it's going to be bad. The ways it's good, it's going to be good. And I get why people might still not want to make that jump if that is something they like critically rely on.
Mm. Yeah, makes sense.
But I just do want to focus on that. Like
Yeah.
Wayland is getting better. People are doing a lot of work on it. It's not that accessibility does not work at all. It's not that nobody's trying to solve these problems, but things take time. And it's probably, I would say, in the maybe the last 2 or 3 years that accessibility work has really picked up again.
Hmm. Yeah, and I know for a while I had to run in Xorg mode on my Fedora system because remote desktop wouldn't cooperate.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm,
on the latest versions, I don't so much have that problem. So it is great over the years to be able to see that proceeding. Um,
mhm, mhm.
it's funny because I started to get involved in the open source community around 2012, 2013, and Wayland was a huge topic of a conversation and how great it was going to be. And then the conversation progressed to, oh my gosh, this is utter garbage. Why doesn't this work? And it's like we're rebuilding a foundational aspect of a Linux distribution here. It's gonna take some time, and not to
I
mention that hardware hasn't exactly slowed down in its capability.
I think it's how long it's taken, which is really like it was pushed very, very heavily early on. Like you had distros like Fedora. I don't even know what year Fedora adopted Wayland by default on GNOME. It was like way too. You couldn't even do screen capture back then. It was good for devs to dog food. It was not good for anybody else. I would say like a lot of things in the tech world, post 2020, when people had a lot of free time to work on things, that's when Wayland legitimately became like really good to use. That's when you could actually do most of the things you want to do. And I think the problem that a lot of people have is they haven't actually tested Wayland themselves in a long time, or if they have tested it, they're testing it on like an Ubuntu LTS. Like you're on 2404, you're a year out of date plus plus however long Ubuntu wanted to wait for a stable version to put into the LTS. So maybe like 18 months out of date of a desktop, and that's the experience you have. That experience is vastly different to what you're going to get now.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean it's advanced so quick, and a lot of the desktop environments like GNOME and KDE have been very faithful to stay up on those updates. But there's still a few distributions that don't want to go that route, that are sticking with X11. Do you think that's a good thing, or do you think that's sort of a necessity while Wayland gets ironed out?
I think this is a really tough one, right? Because there are distros like your Devouins, right? Like which they don't do System D. They're not doing Wayland. That's kind of their shtick. Then you have your distros like Gentoo and Arch, which are just like, we don't care what you do. We're just gonna if you want to run a window manager from the 90s, I don't care. Here's a package for it. Do whatever you want. Go compile it if you want to. This is your system. I don't care. I think for the distros like Fedora, where they're trying to offer a curated experience, it's hard to say whether you should or shouldn't drop the X11 package. That's kind of the direction things are going right now. Distros are deciding, are we going to drop the X11 package whilst Wayland is being ironed out? And in the case of GNOME, that's kind of something you have to do because upstream is making that choice. KDE is in that position where you legitimately can still make this choice. Are you going to keep both sessions around? Are you going to split X11 out into a separate package and then let users download that if they want to? Or are you just going to go the same direction GNOME is going and only offer the Wayland session? I've been on the Wayland session. I'm not using KDE at this point. I swapped off of it over to Neri, but I used it for the first year of the Plasma 6 lifecycle. And for me, I don't have any issues with Wayland at this point. Any of the issues I do have, I have a workaround for. But I'm also not using anything that is X11 critical. I'm not doing heavy remote desktop stuff where a lot of the big popular tools still don't either work on Wayland, or if they do work, they consider their Wayland support to be experimental. There are remote desktop tools. It's just a lot of the like industry tools that people expect, you can find workarounds for tools, but the tools themselves, if you need to use a very specific kind of tool, like I get it, right? Like corporate people have like corporate requirements. They need to like use the thing that they're required to use. But for most desktop users, I think at this point you should just give it a shot and see what it's like. Just actually experience it, right? Like
Mhm.
have firsthand experience in something to know if it's going to resolve everything that you need it to do.
Well, and I've kind of looked at this the same way that I looked at my switch to Linux,
Mm,
uh, on my own systems. Was at some point you got to quit dual booting. At some point,
mm,
you've got to quit running it in a virtual machine, and you've just got to rip off the band-aid and make the switch, and then you see what breaks.
mm,
And I did that a few years ago with Wayland, and for the most part, I haven't really seen a lot of issues. Um, Granted, things like I don't use any accessibility features, nor do I don't really do any remote desktop support at this stage. Pretty much my only remote connectivity protocol that I use is SSH.
mm.
So because none of my servers have GUIs. So yeah, I mean, I feel like for 80, maybe even 90% of people at this point, Wayland is good enough.
Mhm. Yeah, when I speak on accessibility stuff, I don't have hand experience with it myself, but I have spoken with a number of blind developers. I know there's a person in the KDE EV who was employed to do accessibility work.
Mhm.
He makes use of well, he doesn't make use of a screen reader, but he does use heavy desktop Zoom. I've talked to the guy who put out this really long blog post series about accessibility, about using eX-11, and from their experiences, from all I can tell, things are in a mostly good state. And I think you're right there. I wouldn't even say like 80%. I would say it's 80% because those are the people who have kind of just hopped into it, or they're distro swapped and they just never bothered to change it back. I think that extra 20% is, you're always going to have like the stragglers, right? You're always going to have people who they don't want to swap. And I think there are legitimate reasons not to swap. If you are comfortable on an eX-11 only environment, say like you're a DWM user or an awesome WM, or you use the Trinity desktop, which was a fork of KDE back in 3? KDE 3 or 4, one of the two. Someone's going to correct me on it. Or you use Cinnamon, which doesn't have a Wayland session yet. You're on Linux Mint. If your environment doesn't support Wayland yet, like that, I totally get why you're not using it. And I hope for those people the shift is smooth. And I hope that the Wayland sessions they do implement aren't rushed, especially Mint. Because Mint it's always been a fairly slow-moving, conservative sort of distro. So I hope that when they do get their Wayland session out, it's actually really solid.
So I've got a 2-part question for you.
Mhm.
Is Wayland ready for mainstream?
I think it's already mainstream. Like, as I said, it's like 75-80% of people are already using it. It is the option on RHEL at this point. It is like, if you're using corporate, obviously RHEL is used a lot in server context, but if you're using RHEL on the desktop, you're already using Wayland, and you already were using Wayland, because for a long time now, I think since RHEL 7, the Wayland session has been the default. If you're using Fedora, if you're an NVIDIA user, I think since 2023, someone's going to correct me on that, it's been the default. If you're an AMD or an Intel user, it's been the default on Fedora for close to a decade. Ubuntu made the swap a lot more recently. Manjaro made the swap with KDE. I don't know what OpenSUSE is doing, but presumably they've done similar things as well. Like most distros at this point, if you're on GNOME or KDE, they've been defaulting to Wayland for a really long time. The eX-11 option's been there, and you could go and swap to it. But if you're the kind of person who just boots up your system, you run it, it just does its thing, you were already using Wayland, and I think that's a good thing, right? I think it's a good thing that most people don't even know. Like, you shouldn't care about your display protocol, right? Like, that isn't something that most people should care about, in the same way that you shouldn't really care about like what shell you're using. It's cool if you're someone who gets like deep into the weeds of your system, but but you should be it should be possible for you to be someone who just boots up your system and it's just a working operating system.
And then part 2 is, do you think eX-11 is ready to be retired?
In the major desktops, GNOME and KDE, I think there are still a few edge cases where no. Now, for most people, yes, and they're already happy with it. But there are legitimate business use cases where software does not work correctly. And for those people, OS2 is still in deployment in places right now. So for those people, eX-11 is going to stick around until eX-11 doesn't run on the hardware they're using. So it's going to take a long time for those things to be ironed out. And at the end of the day, for some workloads, they are never going to be ironed out because, again, OS2 is in deployment still. There are mainframes from 40 years ago still in deployment as well. There is COBOL code written who knows how many years ago in deployment. Again, there's also the whole Cinnamon problem, right? Like, Cinnamon is a really popular desktop, and I wouldn't want X11 to just be removed from Cinnamon removed from Mint, and then Cinnamon no longer works. And there are distros like Ubuntu, like Fedora, which do have Cinnamon versions as well. They have i3 versions, things like that. And there are people that still want to use those X11 desktops. But I think we are getting very, very close to seeing it be dropped from KDE as well. KDE is taking a very slow approach. They basically want it to be, you have no excuse anymore. They want it to be, we're going to iron out every little issue that we can possibly iron out, and then we're getting rid of X11. And yes, that requires a bit more maintenance burden to keep things around a bit longer, but it is going to create the situation where you're going to make as many people happy as possible. And I get why GNOME's done the approach they've done. No one was touching the code. All of the developers were using Wayland anyway. Every distro shipping GNOME was defaulting to Wayland. I get why they've done it. It makes sense from their perspective. And I respect that they've done it like that. But at the same time, I do think the way KDE is doing it, where they're just taking it as slow as they need to take it, is going to make as few people annoyed as possible. And at the end of the day, right, there's going to be 10 years from now, there's going to be those people, like there are the people with System D, like, or Pulsed Audio, or anything else you want to pick, any other tech you want to pick, where no matter how many of the issues get resolved, no matter how many of their blockers are gone, they're always going to want to keep using the thing they were using. And that's okay, because at the end of the day, it's your computer, and if you want to run something, you can run it.
That's great. I love those answers. So I didn't ask this about Wayland. I asked this about X11. So let me ask this one as we start to wrap. Do you have any horror stories around Wayland? Anything blow up in your face that you'd like to share?
The Qt library. There have been a number of times where it just decides that the Qt Wayland plugin just doesn't exist. And when that happens, the applications don't work, because it will try to load the Wayland plugin, and if it expects the plugin to be there, it just crashes the application. It doesn't fall back to X11. So in those cases, you actually have to force the application. You either have to get the plugin working, which usually just involves turning it off and on again, or you have to force the application to load under X11 and run through X-Wayland. This happened quite a number of times earlier on. It's gotten a lot better now. I don't know what they've done to iron out those issues, but it's definitely a lot smoother. Also, on the Cosmic desktop, there is an issue with, I don't think it's been resolved yet. The last time I used Cosmic, it was a thing, but there was an issue where if you were capturing your desktop, it was fine on the desktop, but in the capture, everything that moved just vibrated. So if you dragged a window, it was just like stuttering back and forth. Windows
sure
would
it wasn't
flicker
wobbly
on and
windows
off.
coming back?
I wish they were wobbly. No, it was just flickering. Flickering windows. That's the new latest effect that everybody's running. It was also like the mouse even was flickering, which was fun as well. So capturing anything on Cosmic was just rough. I don't know why it happened. Some people had solutions that supposedly fixed it. I can never got them to work. It might be resolved now. So if it is resolved and someone from Cosmic sees this, apologies for that. But yeah, that was an issue for a time.
For those of you that don't know what we're talking about, way back in the day, there was a way to add effects to your windows. So one of the most popular was called wobbly windows. And so when you grab the title bar and you start to move, instead of just moving it, the window would jiggle. The best way I can describe it is it looked like you're dragging Jello across your screen. And was there any reason to have that at all? No, but it was just fun. And anyone that was cool, like Brodie and I, had wobbly windows back in the day.
There actually are. I don't know if it's a core part of KDE or if it's a plugin, but you can do it on KDE, which is really cool. Also, it has the cube, so if you like the desktop cube, KDE has that.
I don't know. I might have to bring the cube back. Wobbly windows I can do without. most of the time I'm using keyboard shortcuts to tile my windows anyway, so I don't drag windows very often. But that's good to hear that I could bring back the cube and have some retro desktop moments.
Mhm.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited that you joined me. This was an interesting conversation. Kind of got to hear a little bit about the timeline. Uh, and so I don't record content just to record content. So one of the things that I always ask is where can people go to learn more and where can people go to get involved? Because that is the key to open source. That is why we have things like Wayland. That is why we have things like 2000 different Linux distributions is people get involved. So what are some key resources that you would recommend for folks?
So there is a website called absurdlysuspicious.github.io/Wayland-protocols-table. One of the problems people
That will
have
definitely
with
be in the show notes.
yes, one of the problems people have with Wayland is knowing what compositors support what protocols. This is a website that catalogs all of that, catalogs what compositors support what, gives you a big table of them, explains what each protocol is. So if you're a developer trying to support different protocols, if you're a user trying to know if an application that needs a protocol is going to work on different environments, that is a really awesome resource.
Hmm.
Speaking of awesome, there is another GitHub repo called awesome-wayland. This is a giant collection of Wayland tools. There's like screenshotting tools, lock screens,
Hmm.
basically everything you could possibly want. If you want a Wayland tool, that's the place you should go.
Awesome. Well, I will definitely link those as well as your YouTube channel in the show notes. Really appreciate you sitting down today talking about X11 and Wayland. I know there's news coming out of the major distributions about dropping certain supports, and Ubuntu's next LTS is coming up here in a few months. So there's just so much going on. And while I usually focus more on the enterprise side, as a Linux user and someone who's trying to brainwash my kids to use Linux as opposed to other distributions, or other operating systems, I should say. It is really interesting to hear the history and see where things are going. So, Brodie, anywhere you'd like to send people other than your YouTube channel?
I have my own podcast actually. That would be Tech of a Tea. Uh, I'm right now going through a big section of indie game developers. So if you are for some reason interested in local South Australian and Victorian game developers and really cool things coming out of my country, check that out, I guess. Also, whenever I find a VTuber that uses Linux, I will drag them onto the podcast. So if you like VTubers, come check that out as well. Uh besides that, I don't know. Go actually read the issue trackers going on in Wayland Protocols. I don't want to be the only person that goes through and sifts through all of these comments. Learn learn the process, learn how people are
Hmm.
actually developing these protocols. Don't just wait for things to happen. If you want to get involved, whether it be in Wayland Protocols or any other repo. If you like a project, usually they need more support. Give them a
Definitely,
hand if you have the
definitely,
skills to do so.
totally agree. Well, I appreciate you joining me. You're welcome back on the IT Guy Show anytime there's something you want to talk about. Meantime, thank you all for joining me. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. We've been plugging right along. We're coming up on the end of the year, coming up on episode 20 here in a couple of weeks. So really excited to see the show growing and kind of reestablishing some of the old momentum. Um, don't quite have the next topic nailed down yet, but definitely have got something on the radar, and really looking forward to continuing these amazing conversations with amazing people like Brodie, my guest today. Until then, make sure you like, and if you don't mind, throw a comment in the video. That just helps juice the algorithms and help more people just like you find the show. So yeah, all the usual call outs. So on behalf of my guest today, Brodie Robertson, I've been Eric the IT Guy Hendricks, your host. And until next time, take care.